Part 3. The wet fish gets woke. After 8 years off and on, John finally met someone and got married. Life seemed to really pile up right after that, with him getting attached, my friend Jeannie's widower dying of brain cancer, which left her son an orphan before he was 21. My granddog Bosley had to be put down, and I got completely wasted on a Tuesday and got a second DUI. I am very fortunate that neither DUI episode maimed or killed anyone. I was determined not to be a chronic offender, so when a friend called and asked me to do landmark education, I jumped at the chance. Finally, something completely different. Although it was reminiscent of Jehovah's Witnesses in certain ways, it was very beneficial for me to have that pragmatic piece rather than being so emotional or pseudo-spiritual. Before Landmark, I had so much anger from my mother, I was hoping that I could find her in a coma at the end of her life so I could tell her exactly what I thought of her, knowing she'd hear me. Thank God I got complete with her and things were as good as they could be when she passed. I told her she was not responsible for anything that happened to me and that it was my responsibility to correct what was deficient. Getting complete with her closed the circuits that had been broken, and I could reconnect to myself, the community, my mother, and my source. I've never had a drop of alcohol since, and I don't miss it. They say the opposite of addiction is connection, and I know firsthand. I thought some of these landmark distinctions would make for a healthier and happier relationship. So when I met a new man, I was excited to give that a try. I was going through bankruptcy and foreclosure, and Anonymous wanted me to come and live with him. Two can live as cheaply as one. I'll pay for everything. You just sit your smiling self in the passenger seat. He voluntarily put me as the beneficiary of his $1 million life insurance policy, which was a well-disguised noose. The entire time I was with him, I could not put my finger on what the actual fuck his problem was. Every decision I made was weighed in the balance of that life insurance policy. He knew that and got perverse enjoyment from demanding certain things, or, like for instance, after I moved in, he asked how many times a week I wanted sex. When I answered, he said, "That won't work for me. I want it at least this many times." I had to say yes, or the insurance money went away. Not having retirement well planned, I viewed this as my punishment for not planning as well as my saving grace. We would be getting along doing just fine, and all of a sudden, out of the clear blue, I would just get T-boned. I was so set up to fail constantly, and he could go with days without speaking. Later, I would figure out that he was a covert, vulnerable narcissist, exactly like my father. It was my most powerful lesson to date. It will be extremely hard to fool me again. This guy also seemed very proud of the fact that his part of town had kept blacks from living up there. His lack of empathy during the Michael Brown murder had me extremely concerned, and for good reason. A relative of his was on the MU campus when the racial situation was brewing. He said no relative of mine should ever have to feel afraid walking on campus just because he was from a fraternity founded by General Lee. I said, "You're right. That's the way black and brown boys get to feel every day of their life." Oh my God, I was punished for weeks for that one. His racism and bigotry actually fueled my quest because I wanted to know how to answer him intelligently, aka shut down his ugly racist mouth. Bazinga! It also blinded me from seeing my own racism. As a result, and I was so smugly self-righteous. The more time went on, the more I could see he was lacking such empathy that when he kicked me out into the snow on January 3rd, 2017, 2 weeks after my mother died, I was not surprised. His ugly cruelty knew no bounds. I was too embarrassed to let anyone know, and also was so isolated by him that when I went to Extended Stay America, no, I was too embarrassed to let anyone know, and also was so isolated by him. So I went to Extended Stay America, and a friend of mine volunteered to pay for it. The other side of that is she was the kind of person that would throw money or food at a situation but would not put herself out personally for another. Because I met her through my late fiance, I kept a friendship with her even though we had very, very little in common. In the end, she resembled the last boyfriend and his antics, and that friendship had to go. I don't remember a more critical time for my complex PTSD. Although at the time, I didn't have a label for it. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I got down to 106 pounds from 125. I could actually see my heart beating between my breasts. I remember hearing a voice telling me, "You must eat. You are at the point of no return if you don't." I force-fed myself yogurt, Madras lentils, and was mostly in a fetal position. As usual, Anonymous had a change of mind, told me I could come back and pack at my leisure amidst pleas to patch things up. I was very clear that he was going to jerk the rug out from under my feet and the roof from over my head only once. I had lived with the threat of that daily, and every decision was made with that in mind on my part, whether I was being authentic or not. It was survival. He immediately got on Zoosk and started dating. Those 3 weeks were like living with a 16-year-old boy. But true to his nature, he picked a fight that lasted for 2 of 3 weeks, not speaking. Woohoo! His dumbass bought my furniture, so there's a piece of me in every room of that house. At least I didn't have to move it. He wanted to have a last dinner together, and since he had not paid me for the furniture, I said yes. He actually thought I was going to be a dating coach for him. So I deliberately told him all the opposite things that most women like. For instance, I told him that he grows on people, so just keep showing up relentlessly. Oopsie, ha-ha. Recovering from narcissistic abuse was one of the toughest things I've ever done. I didn't want to bleed all over people who didn't cut me, so I spent about a year just working and going to Center for Spiritual Living in Kansas City. But I spent my free time at Line Creek, communing with nature and healing core emotional wounds. Because I was not socializing, social media was my basic connection. It was at this time I reached out to friend Lee Langston and many of his friends, since he was my music director at CSL. I watched and observed the Black community he was part of, but from a distance. And since it was virtual, there was no white gaze. I was so impressed with these folks who were living large and out loud in spite of hearing that life was always so difficult for them. I was intrigued because somehow they were able to get out of their own way and be successful, and I was still spinning my wheels. I was on a quest to find out just how they did that. When I did start getting out again, I was included sparingly in some of this new community's events. It didn't take long to see the difference, because my new Black friends know how to build community like I've never seen before. And that was what I was searching for my whole life. I was invited to a party at Natasha's house and told her at CSL the next day what I had observed about community. Her exact words to me were, "There's room for everybody." I did not understand at the moment how incredibly large-hearted she had to be to even say that to a white woman. Then a lot of the stuff from the original Fish Doesn't Know It's Wet that I read would go in here. And then after that is finished, I'll pick up. After proclaiming myself an ally, I explored things like the Mayor's Community Alliance for Racial Equality, joined the ACLU, read periodicals like The Root, joined SURJ, Stand Up for Racial Justice, and The Ugly Conversation on Facebook. I made and wore t-shirts saying "End racism, got woke?" question mark. I spoke at a rally because I was horrified at how Murica was separating families and putting children in cages at the border for seeking the human right to asylum. That's when Murica was put in timeout for me until she can act better. And I just totally lost my place, sorry. Okay. At the Mayor's Community Alliance for Racial Equality, I met the director of Healing Pathways Victim Services, Monica Roberts. I had been thinking about where I could volunteer to help and do the most good. This nonprofit offers intervention emotionally and mental. This nonprofit offers intervention emotionally and mentally to help those left behind after dealing with the traumatic death of a family member or caregiver. So it is servicing the Black community for the most part. Our quarterback, Patrick Mahomes, has just come on board as a financial contributor. As part of the training, we filled out an ACE, Adverse Childhood Experiences, is what it stands for. It's a study questionnaire which identifies your level of trauma. I got 8 out of 10. Then they went over information as to how that will impact children if Healing Pathways does not intervene. It was like a textbook for my life, but all I could hear was that I was the common denominator and I am the problem, making me unlovable. I thought these people will never let me help because I'm too damaged. It shook me to my core because for the first time ever, I started to understand that I couldn't have done any better than I did, with so much working against me at such an early age. It was pivotal because I could finally stop beating myself mercilessly between my ears for not being able to function more effectively and feel accomplished and successful. I was starting to see that my waking up to racism had fringe benefits I could never have imagined. When I started listening to Black folks, instead of hearing them in a context of complaining, my life changed exponentially because there was so much healing in their wisdom. Another case in point, I was talking to a Black female friend of mine and told her that my mother did nothing to help me, knowing full well that my father was abusing me. One of the things she said was, well, there's no way to know for sure because mothers make sacrifices no one knows about. I took that out to Line Creek and sat with it. I recalled how after I ran away from home, I returned on April 1st. 9 months from April 1st is January 1st. My baby sister, that is 14 years younger than I am, was born January 4th of that following year. Could it possibly be that my mother offered herself in place of me to her husband and got caught in the form of a pregnancy? That is a lot healthier scenario for me to hang on to than my mother did nothing to help me. I no longer believe that is true, and that is very, very healing. Another case in point, I was attending this same Black female friend's birthday party. One of the attendees was studying to be a nurse. I told her of a plant as medicine that I was taking and that the side effect was dehydration and potassium depletion. She was very emphatic that those two things could be super serious and not to take it lightly. I really heard her. And my normal MO would have been, yeah, I know. There have been a handful of times that I was not able to hydrate properly, and the effects are truly palpable. It was to my advantage to listen to her. I started treating my interaction with Black folks as if they were divine messengers, because they certainly seemed to be delivering timely healing messages. I later applied that to all. Yeah, that's not the ending, but that's where the information ends. as far as what I have written. So we have components that are probably usable, and I don't know how we go forward, whether you just formulate questions and then we figure out who to interview based on that. So I'm going out of town until Monday, but you can always text, call, whatever. All right, thanks for your help, and thanks for coming over the other day. That was awesome. Ciao.